My name is Jessica Holt, and I'm 29 years old now. I run a small but steady repair shop, the kind of place people bring their problems when something mechanical starts screaming like it's possessed. Engines, generators, lawn equipment. If it rattles, leaks, or refuses to cooperate, it usually ends up in my bay. I like the quiet rhythm of fixing things. Machines make sense. They break for reasons. People, not so much. I wasn't always this calm. At 17, I slept on a park bench because my family moved across the country without me. People like to imagine abandonment as loud, screaming fights, slammed doors, dramatic goodbyes. Mine was silent, efficient, almost polite. Growing up, my family operated on an unspoken rule: take from Jessica, give to everyone else. My father, Thomas Holt, believed the world owed him interest on every inconvenience he'd ever suffered. He didn't yell much, he didn't have to. His entitlement sat heavy in every room like stale air. My mother, Marianne, specialized in disappointment. Not anger, disappointment. The kind that made you feel like you were always one mistake away from being quietly replaced. And my older sister, Danielle, was the golden child. Everything she did was potential. Everything I did was expected. I was the fixer, the kid patching drywall, unclogging toilets, balancing school with part-time work, saving money for a car that never became mine because my father borrowed the fund the night before my 16th birthday. When I asked for it back, he called me selfish. I apologized for wanting my own money. That was the dynamic they took. I adjusted. So when I came home one evening after my grocery store shift, tired, sweaty bike rattling beneath me, I didn't expect anything unusual, just another quiet night of being invisible. The house was dark, not asleep dark, empty dark. No cars, blinds shut, silence thick enough to feel wrong. I told myself they'd gone out, that they'd forgotten a light, that I was overthinking. Then I saw the box, a half-crushed cardboard box sitting on the welcome mat. Inside were some clothes, my school binder, a few tools, not even the good ones, and a hoodie I'd been missing for months. Taped to the top was a piece of paper. "You'll manage," signed with both their names. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain couldn't process how small the note was compared to what they'd done. I tried my key anyway. It didn't work. They'd changed the locks. I stood there longer than I can honestly measure. Long enough for denial to burn off. Long enough for the truth to settle into my bones. The landlord pulled up a few minutes later. He looked annoyed, like I was the inconvenience. When I told him I lived there, he frowned and said my parents had terminated the lease that morning. Told him I was just staying temporarily. 17 years old, temporary. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I picked up the box, balanced it on my bike, and rode away like I was finishing a shift, not losing my entire life. That night, I slept on a park bench under a flickering light, staring at the sky, whispering, "Guess I'll manage." That was the moment I stopped being a Holt. And everything that came after every success, every consequence, started right there. I didn't wake up the next morning feeling dramatic or brave. I woke up stiff, cold, and disoriented with a crick in my neck and the metallic taste of fear sitting quietly on my tongue. Sleeping in a park sounds tragic when someone else tells the story. When it's you, it just feels like an uncomfortable nap you didn't agree to. The worst part wasn't the night, it was the morning after. The realization that nothing had been a mistake, that no one was coming back for me. I walked to the drinking fountain, splashed water on my face, adjusted my hoodie, and did the most automatic thing I knew how to do. I went to work. At 17, denial was my survival strategy. If I acted normal long enough, maybe the universe would get confused and leave me alone. The grocery store didn't care where I slept. They barely cared if I was breathing, as long as I showed up on time and didn't knock over displays. I stocked shelves, smiled at customers, helped an elderly woman find her cereal, and nodded through a manager's lecture about attendance like I wasn't technically homeless. When my shift ended, I didn't go anywhere meaningful. I went back to the park. I wasn't ready to beg anyone for a couch. Asking for help felt worse than sleeping outside. It felt like admitting they were right that I couldn't manage. So I found a spot behind some bushes near a picnic table, slid my box underneath, and ate an 80-cent bag of chips for dinner, like it was a choice, not a consequence. A couple days passed like that. Gas station bathrooms became my morning routine. I learned which ones had cleaner sinks, which clerks didn't ask questions, which corners of the park were quieter at night. I slept with one shoe off, so I wouldn't snore and draw attention to myself. I kept telling myself it was temporary. Temporary is a dangerous word. It makes you wait instead of move. On the third day, something shifted, not because life suddenly got kind, but because I stopped being invisible for 5 seconds. A guy walked into the grocery store asking if anyone wanted a temporary job at a mechanic shop. One of their workers had bailed. He didn't finish his sentence before I said yes. Didn't ask about pay. Didn't ask about hours. I just said yes, like my life depended on it, because it did. That's how I met Raphael. He was built like someone who used to fight for a living and stopped only because he got bored of winning. The first thing he said to me wasn't my name. "Can you hold a flashlight without shaking?" "Depends on the flashlight," I said. He smirked. That was my interview. For the first hour, I handed him tools while he fixed a busted alternator. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it wasn't condescending. No lectures. No dad tone. Just facts. Clean, direct, respectful in the way only people who actually know things can be. At the end of the day, he tossed me some cash and said, "Come back tomorrow. Don't touch anything expensive." That sentence felt like trust. I showed up early every day after that, because money meant food and food meant not fading out of existence. Somewhere in that first week, Raphael started teaching me things. How to listen to engines. How to tell when something was about to fail. Why customers describe problems like fortune tellers instead of mechanics. Why WD-40 is basically holy water. In the break room, I met Trevor. He was in his 20s, skinny glasses always sliding down his nose, brain wired like a calculator that never shut off. One day he watched me counting cash and said, "You don't know how to budget, do you?" "If buying the cheapest thing counts, sure," I said. He laughed and pulled up a spreadsheet on his phone like he'd been waiting for someone to ask. He showed me how to track expenses, separate needs from wants, save in fractions instead of chunks. I nodded like I understood, then went back to the park that night and Googled every term one by one. By the end of that week, I had a plan. Not a dream, a plan. Step 1, don't die. Step 2, save enough for a room. Step 3, keep working. Step 4, never turn into Thomas Holt. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to ask Raphael if he knew anyone renting cheap rooms. He raised an eyebrow. "You living in a shack or something?" "Yeah," I said. "Something like that." He didn't push. Just scribbled a number on a scrap of paper and said, "Call this woman. She rents rooms to idiots like you." 5 nights in the park, 3 gas station showers, 1 squirrel that tried to steal my chips. That's what it took. The room was awful. Thin walls, bad mattress, a door that locked only if you kicked it just right. But it had walls. It had privacy. It wasn't the sky. That night, I sat on the floor with my cardboard box and realized something that surprised me. When my family dumped me, I thought that was the end of my story. It wasn't. It was just the end of theirs in it. I didn't wake up one morning magically put together, confident, and fixed. What actually happened was messier. I stumbled forward, tripped a lot, and learned how not to fall the same way twice. The room I rented smelled faintly like mildew and old regret, but it had one thing: the park didn't stability. With a door that locked and a place to leave my shoes, my brain finally had space to think beyond survival. Not big dreams, just the next step. Raphael kept me on at the shop, not officially, no paperwork, no HR forms, just a silent agreement. If you show up and don't act stupid, you get paid. That was enough for me, more than enough. He taught me the way people who actually respect effort teach, by correcting mistakes without humiliation. If I messed up, he stopped me, explained it once, and moved on. If I did well, he nodded and said, "Good." In Raphael language, that was applause. Trevor, on the other hand, decided I was a long-term project. One afternoon, he handed me a cheap notebook and said, "Track everything." "I don't spend much," I told him. "That's not the point," he said. So I did. Every dollar. Snacks, bus fare, gloves, replacement socks. When I put it all on paper, it was humbling how quickly money vanished. But it was also empowering. For the first time, my life wasn't a blur. It was numbers I could control. I started taking side jobs. Word spread that I was the girl who worked hard and charged less than she should. People dropped off broken lawnmowers, weed whackers, generators that sounded like dying animals. Sometimes I fixed them. Sometimes I stared at the machine like it had personally insulted me. Either way, I learned. There was a woman who dropped off a leaf blower and said, "My husband says it's dead. If you fix it, it's yours." I cleaned the carburetor that night. When it roared back to life, I didn't even want the leaf blower. What I wanted was the feeling quiet proof that I could solve problems without asking permission. People stopped calling me that kid. They started calling me Jessica, the one who could fix things. By the time I turned 18, I had enough saved to buy a real set of tools, Heavy, solid, the kind that made you look competent even when you were still guessing half the time. Raphael watched me carry them in and said, "Looks like you're trying to join the big leagues." I shrugged, but inside, something settled into place. A couple months later, he said, "You learn fast. Just don't get cocky." I almost laughed. Cocky wasn't even in my vocabulary, but hearing him say that cracked something open in my head. Maybe I wasn't doomed. Maybe the life I was scraping together wasn't just temporary. So I started planning quietly. At night, I sat on my bed with my notebook writing down ideas that felt ridiculous at the time. Mobile repairs, own tools, maybe a shop someday. It felt like writing become president unrealistic but necessary. You can't chase something you never name. A year passed. Work got steadier. Side jobs paid better. People started recommending me without me asking. One morning, a warehouse manager called about a forklift that wouldn't start. Yeah, I'd never touched one in my life. I said yes anyway. 2 hours later, I fixed a dead starter and walked away with more money than I made in 2 grocery store shifts. That night, I wrote a name across the front of my notebook in crooked letters, Jessica Holt Repair, Mobile Service. It wasn't a business yet, it was a promise. Years went by, like that quiet, productive mine. By my mid-20s, I had a small, one-bay shop that smelled like oil and victory, scuffed walls, stained concrete, a rattling fan that begged for mercy. But it was mine. People trusted me. That mattered more than money. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving, I was building. I didn't realize it yet, but the moment I put my name on that door was the moment my past started paying attention again. By the time my life stopped feeling fragile, I'd almost convinced myself the past had lost my address. The shop ran on routine, morning repairs, afternoon diagnostics, the occasional emergency call that smelled like panic and burnt oil. I liked the predictability. Machines failed honestly. They didn't pretend they cared. They didn't come back years later asking for credit. Then a local business magazine decided to do a feature on young entrepreneurs who didn't crash and burn. I didn't submit anything. My landlord did, probably because I paid rent early and never complained. A photographer showed up and made me hold a wrench like I was modeling for a charity calendar. The article was Harmless Girl, Abandoned Young Built Something Anyway. The kind of feel-good filler people skim between coffee ads. I forgot about it by lunch. My inbox didn't. The first message came from Marianne, not Mom. Just her name typed neatly like a business email. Subject line, "Proud of you, Jessica." She wrote, "We saw the article. You've grown into someone we always knew you could be. Maybe it's time we reconnect as a family. Love, Mom." Love. I stared at that word longer than the rest of the email combined. Then I deleted it. No anger, no shaking hands, just boredom. You don't get to abandon someone and then rebrand it as belief. A few hours later, my father tried. "You're doing well now. We should talk." No apology, no acknowledgement, just entitlement dressed as concern. I didn't respond. Ignoring them didn't make them disappear. It made them creative. A few days later, a man walked into my shop wearing sunglasses indoors, sniffing around like he was evaluating real estate instead of engines. He didn't ask about repairs. He asked how business was, asked if I still talked to my parents. I wiped my hands on a rag and said, "You buying something or sightseeing?" He left without answering. Then contractors started calling confused. Orders canceled. Emails I never sent. My business name, one letter off, was being used to impersonate me. It wasn't subtle. It was sloppy. Desperate. When random relatives I barely remembered started messaging things like, "Your parents miss you," I understood. They didn't want me back. They wanted access. The proof walked in one afternoon, wearing my mother's perfume. Marianne stood in the front office, pacing like she was rehearsing grief. When she saw me, her face lit up like I was a lost pet. "Jessica," she breathed. "You're really here." "Pretty sure," I said. "I work here." She moved like she wanted a hug. I stepped back. Not aggressive, just final. "We need to talk," she said. "About what I asked." The porch, the box. Or the people you've been sending to spy on me. She froze, then defaulted to her favorite defense. "You're being dramatic." I laughed once, short, sharp. She started talking about healing, about family bonds, about how hard things had been lately. Translation, they needed money. I opened the door and held it. "You can leave now." Her face collapsed. She stormed out, muttering under her breath. That wasn't the peak, that was the warning. Something uglier was loading. If you've never seen entitlement panic, it doesn't scream at first. It probes. The first email from my father landed 2 days after Marianne's visit. "Since you're doing well now, it's time you step up and help your family. We raised you. We expect support. Call me. No greeting, no apology, just expectation. I didn't reply. The next message came as a text from an unknown number. Don't ignore me. You owe us. Everything you have is because of how we raised you. I stared at the screen and actually laughed. Quietly. The kind of laugh you make when your brain can't decide between disbelief and violence. I typed back one sentence. I don't fund people who abandon me. 15 seconds later, a wall of text arrived. Guilt, threats, emotional gymnastics so impressive it almost deserved a medal. I blocked the number and went back to work. Blocking him was the spark. The fire came next. It started small enough that I almost brushed it off. A customer came back complaining her tire was flat right after leaving my shop. I checked it clean / too clean to be accidental. I patched it for free and apologized, but my gut already knew. The next morning, 2 more cars. Same cut, same side of the building. I checked the security footage. The camera covering that side was smashed. One grainy clip caught a figure walking up and swinging something heavy before the feed cut out. I didn't need a face to know who it was. Raphael stopped by later to borrow a tool. I showed him the footage. Looks personal, he said. Yeah, I replied. Family tradition. He grunted. That was his version of sympathy. Then a generator came back broken after I'd fixed it. I opened the tank and found sand. A handful of it. Sand in an engine isn't sabotage. It's execution. I refunded the customer out of my own pocket and stayed late cleaning every trace out. That one made me angry. Not because of the money, because they were hurting people who trusted me. That night, I found the note taped to the back door. You owe us. Big black marker. All caps. Like volume could replace logic. I took a photo, slid it into a plastic bag, and kept working. Some people crumble when their past shows up to punish them. I just added it to my to-do list. A few days later, I came home late and found Marianne screaming in my apartment lobby, arguing with the front desk like it was a stage. When she saw me, she switched instantly from rage to helpless. Why won't you talk to us? She cried. Because you're yelling in my lobby, I said calmly. She dropped to her knees. Literally. Phones came out. The performance was flawless. You're heartless, she screamed, after everything we did for you. I stepped into the elevator and said over my shoulder, You didn't do things for me. You did things to me. The doors closed on her screaming. The video went viral. The next morning, a major contract backed out citing stability concerns. That was the moment I stopped tolerating it. Because this wasn't family drama anymore. This was war. Losing that contract hurt more than I expected. Not because I needed the money the shop would survive, but because it proved something I'd been trying not to admit. My parents weren't just trying to scare me anymore. They were willing to burn everything I'd built just to feel powerful again. I didn't spiral, I didn't cry. I went to the gym. There's something honest about hitting a heavy bag. It doesn't lie to you. It doesn't care why you're angry. It just absorbs what you give it. I wrapped my hands, squared up, and punched until my knuckles buzzed and my thoughts finally quieted. My coach watched for a while, then said, Whatever you're fighting isn't here. I know, I said, and kept swinging. Sabotage is annoying, expensive, childish. But what came next wasn't sabotage. It was obsession pretending to be family. A week after the lobby incident, I opened the shop early and found my business page flooded with new reviews. Not subtle ones, full-blown accusations. She threatened me when I asked for a refund. I saw her screaming at customers. She steals from family. That last one made me snort. Subtlety had never been their strength. I didn't respond. I documented. Screenshots, usernames, timestamps. I started a folder on my computer labeled Evidence. It filled faster than I liked. Then suppliers started calling. One told me I'd sent a nasty email canceling orders and insulting their staff. I asked him to forward it. It came from an address that looked like mine if you weren't paying attention, one letter off, same logo in the signature. I hadn't written it. I'd been asleep when it was sent. I smoothed it over, but I heard the doubt in his voice. Doubt sticks. It lingers. Later that week, a man walked straight into my employee-only area holding his phone up like he was recording proof of alien life. This area is restricted, I said. He smirked. Your father said you'd try to hide. I'm here to talk sense into you. Something in me went cold. I stepped forward, blocking his view. You have 2 choices. Leave on your own or leave with assistance. He blinked. Are you threatening me? No, I said calmly. Threats require effort. I'm stating a fact. He left quickly. That night, I came back after hours to grab a tool I'd forgotten. As I reached the back entrance, my foot slipped. Oil smeared across the ground in a deliberate line. Next to it was another note. Family doesn't turn their back. I didn't laugh this time. I picked it up with gloves, bagged it, and whispered, You really want to get arrested, don't you? The next morning, I walked into the police station with a backpack full of evidence. Photos, notes, broken camera, slashed tires, emails, reviews, everything neatly organized. The officer flipped through it slowly, eyebrows climbing. All from the same people. Unfortunately, I said. They share my last name. He nodded. This isn't a family dispute anymore. That was the first time in weeks I felt relief, because now it wasn't just me standing alone. Once the report was filed, something inside me finally settled. Not relief exactly, more like alignment. For the first time since Marianne showed up at my shop pretending to care, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was moving forward. The officer told me they'd open an investigation immediately. Harassment, vandalism, impersonation, potential stalking. Hearing those words out loud reframed everything. My childhood instincts had always labeled their behavior as normal. Annoying, but normal. Seeing it written in legal language stripped away that illusion. Later that afternoon, I met my lawyer. His name was Carson. Mid-40s. Calm. The kind of man who looked allergic to drama and deeply offended by nonsense. He spread my evidence across his desk and read through it in silence. After a full minute, he said, "We're going to court, and we're getting a restraining order." "Good," I said. He looked up at me. "You're remarkably composed." I shrugged. "I grew up with them. This is the quiet version." He actually laughed at that, shook his head, and started drafting paperwork. Temporary restraining order, no contact clause, distance requirements from my shop, my apartment, any job site associated with me. Within a week, Thomas and Marianne were served. Of course, my father didn't take it well. He texted me from a new number. "You're overreacting. We're family. You owe us." I replied with 3 words. "See you in court." That was it. No speeches, no emotional essays. I was done explaining myself to people who only listened when it benefited them. Court day arrived gray and heavy, like the sky knew what kind of mess it was covering. I wore clean work boots, jeans without grease stains, and a black shirt. Carson raised an eyebrow, like he'd hoped for something fancier. "I'm not here to perform," I said. Thomas and Marianne were already in the courthouse lobby when we arrived. My father stood stiff, jaw clenched, like he was daring the world to disagree with him. My mother's eyes were glossy tears on standby, ready for deployment. They tried to approach me. I didn't slow down. Carson leaned in and whispered niece. Inside the courtroom, the judge began reading the list of accusations. It took longer than I expected. Each item stacked neatly on top of the last: vandalism, harassment, impersonation, intimidation. When she finally looked up, her expression was the same one I give customers who say they ignored the warning lights. Thomas tried to interrupt. The judge raised a hand. "Sir, you'll speak when I ask you to." Silence fell hard. Carson presented the evidence methodically. Photos, videos, emails, notes, footage of someone smashing my camera, a grainy clip of sand being poured into an engine, the video of Marianne screaming in my apartment lobby. The judge muttered, "Good grief." Thomas finally blurted out, "She owes us." We raised her. The judge turned to him slowly. "You abandoned a minor." The room froze. Marianne jumped in, voice trembling. "We made a mistake. We thought she'd be fine. She was always so independent." I spoke then. Calm. Clear. I was independent because I had to be. The judge nodded, noted. Then came the notes, "You owe us. Family doesn't turn their back." Both of them denied writing them. The judge compared the handwriting to their signatures. Raised an eyebrow. Chaos followed. Excuses. Contradictions. Voices overlapping until the gavel slammed down. Enough. The ruling came swiftly. A 3-year restraining order. Full no contact. No approaching me, my business, or my home. Any violation would carry immediate consequences. Damages and criminal charges would proceed separately. Thomas exploded. Marianne cried. Real tears this time, but too late. As I stood to leave, my older sister Danielle, who had been silent in the back row, called my name. "Jessica, I'm sorry. I didn't know how bad it was." I looked at her for a long moment. "Fix yourself first," I said. "The rest isn't my job." I walked out of the courthouse without looking back. For the first time since I was 17, I wasn't running. I was done. I thought the restraining order would be the end of it. That's what reasonable people do. They hit a wall, realize they've gone too far, and stop. But Thomas and Marianne had never been reasonable. They'd spent their whole lives mistaking persistence for righteousness. That night after court, I stayed late at the shop. Not because I needed to, but because I didn't want to sit alone with the quiet yet. I was locking up when a rock slammed into the glass door, hard enough to spiderweb the corner. I looked up just in time to see a car peeling out of the lot. I didn't scream, I didn't chase it. I took a photo, pulled the footage from the remaining cameras, swept the glass into a bin. Then I called it in as a restraining order violation before the dust had settled. The officer on the phone sighed not in annoyance but recognition. "We'll handle it." And they did. That was the difference this time. I wasn't the 17-year-old girl standing on a porch with a cardboard box and nowhere to go. I was a business owner with documentation witnesses, a lawyer, and the law finally paying attention. The next few weeks were quieter. Not peaceful quieter. Investigations moved forward. Charges stacked where they belonged. Word got around town, the real story replacing the ugly rumors. Customers came back. Some apologized for believing the reviews. I didn't hold it against them. Reputation is fragile when people don't know your past. Danielle sent me one last message. "I hope you're okay." I didn't reply. Not out of anger, out of honesty. Healing doesn't always include reconciliation. One evening, I stayed late finishing a generator repair. The shop smelled like oil and metal and something steady. I wiped my hands, turned off the lights, and stood there for a second listening to the silence. I thought about that park bench, about the box, about the girl who whispered, "I'll manage," into the dark without knowing how. She did manage. More than that, she built something solid enough to withstand people who thought they owned her just because they shared her blood. Family isn't who raises you when it's convenient. It's who doesn't abandon you when it isn't. I locked the door, stepped into the night, and walked to my car without looking over my shoulder. Because some people lose access the moment they confuse entitlement with love. And once you close that door properly, it stays closed.